Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. At exactly midnight, a pulse moved through the earth. Not a sound. Not a flash. Just a second that didn't belong. No one saw it arrive. No satellites recorded the burst. But every atomic clock skipped forward, not by a measurable unit but by sensation. Time felt uneven, as though some quiet thread had snapped and been replaced mid-beat. In Anchorage, an engineer monitoring seismic telemetry stepped away from his desk to refill a cup. When he returned, his screen had frozen, half a waveform on display, the rest blank. The file timestamp had shifted. Logged, saved, sealed. But the event itself refused to repeat. His instruments were clean. No faults. Still, the gap refused to explain itself. Across the Atlantic, long-haul pilots on transoceanic routes checked their chronometers and found misalignment. The air traffic control systems adjusted automatically, blaming leap-second errors. No alerts issued. Nothing flagged. Planes landed. Systems recalibrated. Everyone moved on. Beneath the streets of Lyon, maintenance crews finished repairs in the metro. A supervisor pulled out his phone to log the time. Midnight. The moment flickered to 12:01 with no transition. One worker muttered about déjà vu. Another paused mid-step, suddenly unsure whether they'd already closed the hatch. No one mentioned it again. The world remained still. But something beneath that stillness had reoriented. Not forward. Not backward. Just off-center. A weather station in Mongolia received satellite telemetry that mapped wind vectors in unreadable geometry. It wasn't corrupted, it was formatted differently. The software refused to open the files, labeling them incompatible. An analyst copied the data to a backup drive. By morning, it had vanished. Not erased. Reformatted. Blank, except for a single unreadable character at the top of the file directory. The pulse wasn't news. Nothing burned. No alarms. No casualties. No statements from government. Nothing measurable changed. But some people, scattered and unconnected, woke up feeling colder. Not to the air. To something internal. A blankness at the edges of thought. An absence that refused to explain itself. One man in Kyoto stepped outside and stood barefoot on the pavement. The street lights were on. The air tasted like iron. He couldn't remember locking the front door. Or unlocking it. Inside, the kettle had boiled dry. In Tel Aviv, a dog barked 3 times, stopped, and sat still for a full hour. Its owner thought the animal had died, only for it to rise and walk calmly into the kitchen, as if nothing had happened. The clock on the oven was 5 minutes fast. It had never gained time before. There were no patterns. No epicenter. No voice of explanation. Only minor inconsistencies scattered like dust. A coin mislaid. A light left on that no one remembered switching. A voicemail half deleted with no record of who left it. All across the globe, data logs remained technically intact. But the metadata felt wrong. Files had timestamps just slightly ahead of the physical clocks beside them. Seismographs printed clear outputs, but gaps lined up too precisely with the missing second. The pulse didn't shake the world. It rearranged familiarity. And by dawn, everyone had adjusted. Naturally. Instinctively. Just enough to forget they had noticed anything at all. The lab sat quiet, long past working hours, lit only by the screen's white glow. Each instrument blinked in sync, a grid of precision. On the desk, a ceramic mug left a faint ring on a map of fault lines. She leaned in, fingers moving across the trackpad with steady rhythm, adjusting the scale. The seismic trace from midnight stared back. Clean entry, smooth calibration, followed by something that refused to name itself. No peak. No shake. Just a dip in pressure where nothing should dip. Not a malfunction. Not noise. The numbers checked out, but the shape didn't belong. An overlay of past events gave nothing to compare. Earthquakes have character. Even minor ones speak a language. Tension, fracture, release. This was blankness pretending to be data. She ran the diagnostics again. Hardware clean. Memory stable. Storage logs showed no rewrite, no outside access. Every timestamp intact. Only the trace itself pulsed wrong, like an echo of something that never had a source. Messages were sent. 5 to be exact. Trusted colleagues, different continents, different disciplines. Most replied within the hour. One in Reykjavik sent a screenshot. Similar pattern. Same time. Same clean break. Another, operating out of Sao Paulo, confirmed with clipped certainty. Anomaly detected, no local triggers, no replication. He included a single sentence at the end. It looks like a carrier wave without the carrier. The phrasing lodged itself. She reread it 3 times. A signal missing its origin. Like hearing a sentence but not the voice. Like finding an imprint with no weight. She pulled up live feeds from peripheral stations. Small, mostly forgotten node. One outpost in northern Canada had data so clean it seemed fake. The silence inside the spike was total. Not zero. Not interference. An engineered pause. When she tried to export the file, the waveform distorted. A smooth parabolic rise slipped into abrupt verticals. The timestamps aligned, but the pressure gradients did not. It was as if the moment refused to be remembered the same way twice. The radiator hummed along the back wall. Outside, the wind carved through the snow, lifting dry particles off the iced gravel. No storm. No disruption. Just pressure in the air that didn't match the barometer. She opened archived event logs. One by one, overlaying them onto the anomaly. Nothing matched. Nothing even came close. Geological events had mass, volume, sequence. This had none. Just subtraction. One final message arrived, this time from Tokyo. A researcher known for refusing guesswork. His reply was shorter than the rest. We saw it too. We ran backups 3 times. The shape is never the same. The time is always exact. Stop logging it. It doesn't want to stay. The room felt smaller after that. Her eyes stayed fixed on the screen, though her mind had moved elsewhere. She reached for the mug, found it cold. Across the surface of the desk, every instrument ticked forward, exact and indifferent. A printer in the corner kicked into motion without instruction. A single page slid out. The graph on it looked familiar, but not recent. Not real. When she picked it up, the paper felt too thin, the ink uneven. No date on the footer. Just a line of data points with a blank space in the center. Behind her, the wall clock showed 12 o'clock. A hand moved. The second one did not. The phone rang just past 6 in the morning, the kind of hour that doesn't expect grief but receives it anyway. A woman's voice, steady but edged with fatigue, asked for confirmation of a burial. Her parents, she said, and her younger brother. All gone within the same week. All laid to rest at the small plot near the chapel. She wanted to visit before winter sealed the ground. He listened without interruption, recognizing her name before she spoke it. Her family had lived in the village longer than the records could show. 3 losses in 7 days. He thought of the week it happened. The weather had turned early. Fog sank low along the roads. Church bells rang twice that Sunday. When the call ended, he stepped into the back office. The ledger stood on its shelf, worn leather cracked at the spine. It opened to empty columns. September's entries were still intact, rows of names, dates, signatures. The next page should have listed the 3 she mentioned. It was blank. No ink. No indentation. Just paper untouched. He checked the digital database, though he disliked it. The interface blinked with pale blue text. Last entry. A man who'd passed quietly in his sleep. No trace of the family. No service scheduled. No invoice. No chapel reservation. Nothing. The shelf of archived folders ran along the far wall. Each year in its own box. He removed the one marked for the season. Paper clips. Contract. Photocopies. All in order. Except for a gap. Exactly where those records should have been, there was absence. Not misfiled. Not reordered. Just space, clean and unclaimed. He sat without realizing it, hand resting on the drawer's edge. Light from the window caught dust in the air, unmoving. Across the room, the small refrigerator hummed softly. Something was wrong, not in the dramatic sense, but in the kind that dulls the tongue and slows the breath. He opened the email archive. Searched her name. Found nothing. No correspondence. No request. The account logs showed no deletions. Every byte accounted for. But no one had contacted the office about 3 burials that month. On the hallway coat rack, a folded black umbrella leaned inward. A ribbon tied around the handle. He didn't own it. The chapel door remained closed most days, but he checked it anyway. Cold air inside, still and scented faintly of oil and stone. The memorial book near the altar should have been full. A single page had been signed. A name he didn't recognize. No mention of the family. No condolences. Just the phrase, written in uneven cursive. It was quieter than expected. Returning to the office, he stared at the telephone, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. That evening, he walked to the cemetery. The sun had dropped behind the ridge, casting long shadows between the rows. Gravel shifted underfoot. The path forked at the old yew tree. There were no fresh graves. No disturbed earth. No flowers. No placards. The stretch where he remembered walking the procession stood unmarked, as though it had never been touched. But he remembered the priest's voice catching on the third name. He remembered the rain starting mid-service. He remembered standing with his back to the wind. He returned to the office. The light above the shelf flickered once, then steadied. He opened the ledger again, turned 2 pages forward. In the margin, a faint smudge, something erased without care. The room smelled faintly of smoke, though nothing burned. The ceiling fan creaked slightly above the bed, pushing warm air around a room too narrow for anything beyond the essentials. On one side, a desk with a chipped corner, paper curled with age. On the other, a mattress barely wide enough for one. A plastic chair pressed against the closet. Only one school uniform hung behind the door. He spoke directly to the phone camera. Voice low, almost uncertain. Not dramatic. Just tired. Said he needed someone to tell him they remembered too. The video lasted under 3 minutes. No edits. No hashtags. He uploaded it without a title. In the video, he described mornings spent arguing over whose turn it was to make tea. The way 2 toothbrushes always sat beside the sink. Birthday photos. There used to be 2 cakes one year, one with a football on top, the other with a book-shaped frosting. He didn't cry. Didn't plead. Just named the things that didn't make sense anymore. Across the hallway, the woman who raised him made a quiet dinner. She stirred the soup slowly, as if rehearsing a rhythm she no longer needed. When asked again, she answered without anger. Just confusion. She remembered one son. Always had. Said he must have dreamt the rest. In the neighborhood, older children on the street recalled matches played on dusty asphalt. They spoke of 2 jerseys, one stained with clay. One of the shopkeepers mentioned breaking up a fight between the boys outside his kiosk. He paused after saying it, eyes narrowing, unsure where the memory ended. The school records showed an enrollment line that read Chuka and, followed by a blank space. No surname. No grade level. No parent's signature for the second child. The guidance counselor scrolled through the digital form, lips pressed thin. Said maybe it had been a mistake in formatting. Maybe the field autofilled and no one noticed. But the yearbook photo told a different story. One figure in uniform. The other beside him, slightly taller, eyes turned away from the lens. Half of the page had been blacked out, not redacted, just overwritten in layout. The student beneath the ink had no name listed. That night, he stood at the back of the compound, phone in hand, listening to traffic hum beyond the wall. He pressed record again, this time showing the bedroom. Pan left, then right. One bed. One set of books. The closet contained half the things he remembered. Only one pair of shoes. Only one comb. Someone messaged him. No name. Just a sentence, he used to wear blue. He didn't respond. The following morning, the power went out briefly. When it returned, the video had gained thousands of views. Most comments told him he was wrong. Dreaming. Making it up. A few didn't. A woman from Jos said her daughter remembered a classmate who no longer existed. A man in Enugu described a brother whose handwriting showed up in a book he'd never read before. He tried to show the photos again. The ones with 2 boys. They opened blank. The phone buzzed on the table, low and steady. Across the hallway, the woman prayed in silence, face to the wall. She had cleared out a drawer earlier that day. Said it was always empty. He didn't argue. By nightfall, he sat by the window, staring at the single bed. The wall beside it had faint discoloration where a second mattress had once leaned. Dust clung to the edges of absence. He closed the door behind him and stood in the hallway a long time, listening for a second voice that did not answer. It started with a thread posted at 2 in the morning. No title. Just a sentence asking why no one remembered the corner bookstore that used to sit opposite the old bus depot. The original poster included a blurry street photo. A bench. A lamppost. A reflection in the window behind them showing shelves lined with hardcovers. No one could find the shop on any map. Real estate records for the address showed a cafe that opened 6 years ago. The photo metadata read 3 months prior. Replies poured in. Some recalled the bookstore clearly. Names of staff, the smell of paper near the back wall, the bell that rang twice on closing. Others insisted the location had never been anything but a coffee shop. Arguments filled the page. Screenshots surfaced, none conclusive. Every image blurred at the edges. Every receipt too faded to read. More posts followed. One about a childhood friend whose name no longer returned result. Another about a street that curved left near the post office but now led straight through. Some pointed out languages they had studied in school had changed subtly. A vowel no longer present. A word that once ended in double consonants shortened without trace. People corrected dictionaries and found the edits had never happened. A baking forum erupted over a cookie recipe. Older users recalled 5 ingredients. Newer users said 6. A printed copy from 2011 included vanilla. Modern versions omitted it entirely. The dispute drew thousands. Someone claimed to remember the original brand that made the flour used. The company had no record of such a product ever existing. Discussions spread across platforms. Not as trending news. Not in headlines. Just quiet repetition. People recounting meals with someone whose face remained but whose name slipped too easily. Others wrote about doors and homes they grew up in, now missing. One described a park bench engraved with initials, photographed every year on a birthday. The most recent visit showed no engraving. Just worn wood, unmarked. A user from Iceland shared a screenshot of a digital map showing a trail through a coastal cliff. They had walked it for years. It was gone. The coordinates now dropped into water. No earthquake. No erosion. Just absence. The map company responded politely. The trail had never existed. Private messages began to circulate. Unsearchable links. Direct image shares. People stopped relying on search bars. Cached pages vanished. Archived forums returned errors. Comments froze mid-thread. Replies disappeared mid-sentence. Someone built a spreadsheet. Thousands of anomalies submitted. Locations, names, food items, minor changes to film credits, forgotten relatives, street layouts. One pattern emerged. No event was violent. No memory led to trauma. Just omissions. Precise. Clean. As though carefully selected for removal. A man posted a video showing 3 mugs on a kitchen shelf. Each one painted with a different bird. He panned across them, slow and careful. In a second clip taken 2 minutes later, only 2 mugs remained. He played the videos side by side. The shelf was shorter in the second one. The wall behind had lost a crack near the corner. Comments filled the page. No one saw a cut. No one accused him of trickery. But few acknowledged the missing mug. Most asked about the camera settings. One user wrote a single sentence. Maybe it wasn't important enough to keep. There was no coverage. No mention from authorities. No announcements. People searched news archives from the week the radiation pulse occurred. Most databases showed no unusual event. But the headlines from that day read like filler. Factory contract. Weather patterns. A tourist arrested for theft. Not one front page carried anything of weight. Some users stopped posting altogether. Others copied entire threads by hand and shared them through scanned notebooks. One forum disappeared entirely. Its domain redirected to a site selling garden tools. The silence around it wasn't organized. It didn't feel enforced. It felt as if the absence had always been there, waiting to be noticed, and once noticed, it pressed harder. People remembered less. They logged off more. Some wrote their memories on bathroom mirrors, only to return and find the words smudged or reduced to lines they no longer recognized. No one was taken. No one vanished. They were just no longer part of what counted. The first message arrived without greeting, just a file name and a timestamp. Attached was a single line of text. You'll need to check it more than once. She opened the file alone, in a room lit only by the monitor's glow. A neutrino scatter plot, captured precisely at the hour the radiation pulse was said to have passed. The graph displayed a strange asymmetry, dense activity on the left axis tapering into a shallow dip. A soft slope that shouldn't have been there. She saved the file under a new name and closed it. Opened it again. Same title. Same file size. Same timestamp. Different plot. Not wildly different. Not restructured. The asymmetry was gone, replaced by a near-perfect Gaussian distribution. Clean curve. Nothing unusual. It looked like noise from a high-altitude muon burst. Common enough. Expected, even. She opened the original message again. No edits. No second version. The sender remained silent. Opening the file a third time yielded another shift. The curve remained, but this one showed a compression along the x-axis. Data points clustered tighter. The legend below the graph displayed units that didn't match any sensor she knew. The labels looked familiar. Language aligned with standard particle detection, but some letters were off. Slightly. As if written in a dialect she almost recognized. She messaged back. No reply. Her hands hovered over the keyboard longer than necessary. She copied the file to an external drive, checked the checksum, confirmed byte integrity. Reopened it. New graph. Again. Same size. Same name. Slightly altered title bar. She contacted the lab where the data originated. The technician on duty didn't understand the question. Their logs showed no edits, no replacements, no access after upload. They sent a snapshot of the server history. The access logs showed her request. Nothing else. She asked to speak to the one who sent the message. The line went quiet. When the voice returned, it was someone else. They claimed not to know the name she mentioned. That night, she called a number she hadn't dialed in months. No introduction, no apology. She asked him how many times he'd opened it. His answer came slowly. He said he'd stopped counting at 12. He described the first version, identical to what she'd seen. Then described others. One showed a gap in scatter signature that traced a perfect diagonal from top right to bottom left, as though something had passed through the earth with too little resistance. Another version replaced the graph with overlapping waveforms. Not noise. Not random. Something that seemed to follow breath. He hadn't slept in 3 days. The last version he described wasn't a graph. It was a grayscale image, pixelated, low resolution. A surface with shallow grooves. No scale. No markers. He wasn't sure if it was a scan or a photograph. It looked like something pressed into ash. She told him to send it. He said he tried. The image wouldn't attach. Wouldn't copy. Wouldn't print. The file showed up in his list, but when opened, it reverted to the curve again. A new one each time. He thought he was losing his mind. He said the graphs were taunting him. Like the data knew he was looking for the wrong question. She didn't think he was wrong. Her own copy now opened into a screen of binary characters. Not code. A block of ones and zeros with no header, no file type, no readable metadata. When she highlighted a section and pasted it into a blank document, the characters changed position before her cursor landed. She stopped trying to document it. Instead, she opened the file again. And again. Each time, her breath caught differently, as if the act of observing adjusted the structure. She recorded her reactions. Not the data. Just her own pulse, her own silence, her own pause before speaking. Every playback carried different weight, as if the audio was responding. She didn't send the file to anyone else. No one else needed to watch their evidence rearrange itself into obedience. Proof doesn't disappear. Unless it never wanted to be proof. The archive room hadn't been opened in months. Dust clung to the floor in patches where no foot had disturbed it. The air smelled of old ink and glue, still and breathless. Metal drawers lined the back wall, each labeled by decade, each lock stiff from time. The key fit after 3 tries. Inside, the microfilm reels sat arranged by hand, not alphabet. No one had catalogued this section in years. He pulled the one marked 1976 and fed it through the viewer. The machine stuttered for a moment before light passed through. The screen glowed weakly, the image grainy but legible. He scrolled past land records, marriage listings, a fire brigade roster, finally stopping on a census page dated early autumn. The table was cleanly typed, each row aligned. Most names sparked recognition, families still in the village, some long gone. But near the bottom were 5 entries he had never seen. Each had an address. Each listed an occupation. Ages ranged from 12 to 72. One lived on Rue Corbielle, a street no longer listed in postal records but present in the map's edge folds. Another's profession was listed as signal operator, though the title hadn't existed since the old rail line closed. The oldest entry gave no birth year, only a question mark typed over an erased field. He printed the page without hesitation. The machine hissed briefly, warm paper sliding into his palm. The ink was sharp. He underlined each unknown name, folded the page, placed it in his coat pocket without looking again. The neighbor lived 2 houses down. An older man with cloudy eyes and a memory that wandered. When asked about the names, he hesitated. He knew them, knew at least some of them. The signal operator had helped install the bell tower wiring. The child played with his granddaughter before the family moved south. He rubbed his temple as he spoke, as though recalling something just beyond the reach of thought. When pressed for faces, he frowned. Couldn't say. Described none. Later that evening, the paper was unfolded beneath a lamp in the back office. The page was blank. No smudges. No faded text. The fold still creased sharply, but the surface was clean. Not erased. Not whitened. Just untouched. He returned to the archive room. Rewound the reel. Past the fire brigade, the marriage listings, the land record. The census was there, but the page had shifted. The bottom 5 rows were gone. No spacing, no visible removal. The table ended cleanly, as though it had always stopped early. Outside, the wind had risen. Loose leaves scraped the pavement in uneven rhythm. Streetlights hummed with low voltage. The clock above the church showed the wrong hour, frozen at a time he couldn't recall seeing pass. The path to the cemetery was narrow, carved between stone walls. Weeds pushed through the cracks. He reached the gate expecting it open as always. It wasn't. 2 iron bars had been welded across the hinges. The welds were new. The paint still bubbled along the seams. No notice posted. No sign of maintenance. Through the bars, rows of headstones stretched into the dusk. He counted 17 visible markers. Fewer than before. No fresh flowers. No worn earth. The stone angel near the back was missing an arm that had been intact the week before. He stood there longer than intended. Behind him, the road was empty. No cars. No voices. No light but the dim reflection of the town's single working lamp. He didn't return to the archive that night. Instead, he left the paper folded on the office desk. The next morning, it was gone. In its place, a torn envelope with no writing, no stamp, just weightless paper, sealed shut and empty inside. The view count rose slowly at first, climbing through the night while the city slept. By morning, the number had reached tens of thousands. No promotion, no algorithmic push, just silent momentum. The video spread in private chats, encrypted threads, closed group feed. Not trending, not flagged. Just present in places that didn't usually move together. The comments said more than the video ever could. No dramatics, no spectacle. Just names typed like confessions. Lines filled with hesitation. I thought I was the only one. My brother was there last week. Now there's no record. My teacher wrote in cursive. The school says she never worked there. The scar on my son's hand is gone and so is the accident that caused it. No one used the word missing. Not once. Because nothing was gone. Everything was in its place. Photos looked intact. Rooms remained furnished. Calendars ticked forward. But something underneath had shifted, and people could feel the loss even if they couldn't name it. A woman in Cape Town described a photograph that changed overnight. Her father stood in the center, as always, but the child holding his hand had been replaced. Not removed. Replaced. Same pose, same clothes, different eyes. She remembered the first child. So did her sister. The photo disagreed. An old man in Lisbon recalled a friend who used to call every Sunday. Said the calls had stopped 2 months ago. He checked his phone history. No record of any contact in the last year. The number had never been stored. His notebook still listed it in pencil. A cluster of videos appeared next. Recordings of voices talking to people no longer present. Footsteps heard off camera. Chairs pulled back without occupants. Background conversations caught in recordings that, on playback, included names never mentioned before. Voices without ownership. Some users printed their memories. Pages covered in handwriting, drawings, timestamp. One post showed a wall covered with printouts and photographs, each tagged with sticky note. The next day, the same user uploaded a second image. The wall stood blank. Not erased. Unmarked. The lighting unchanged. The arrangement of the room identical. Except the wall had never been written on. The term unprovable grief began to circulate. Quietly. Between people who had nothing to gain by saying they remembered. People who couldn't convince their families, their friends, their own senses. The pain had no wound. The absence had no name. Only weight. Lingering. Uneven. Real. In the middle of this, a pattern began to form. The connections weren't geographic. Not demographic. Not social. The people remembering didn't share belief systems or political leanings. They didn't read the same books. Didn't follow the same shows. But there were intersections. Fragments of mentions, casual references, similar phrases. At first, it looked random. Until the datasets were aligned. Each memory involved a person who had touched another. A conversation. A shared location. A borrowed item. A childhood friendship. A late-night call. A group project. A road trip. A shared song. Every person removed had once been near another who was also remembered in absence. The names began to cluster. Not by place but by presence. A ring of individuals traced across continents. They had known each other. Not always deeply. Sometimes only briefly. But the connections were real. Documented in the memories of those left behind. She found them by following the shape of the gap. Each online account, each testimonial, each fragment pointed to someone who was no longer listed. She mapped them by removal, not by presence. And when the ring completed, it didn't encircle any nation or ideology. It formed a shape without symmetry. Not a pattern in the data. A shape in the missing. No one spoke their names out loud. Not because they were afraid, but because the moment they tried, the names changed. Letters swapped. Syllables dropped. Images blurred. They had been known. They were not meant to be remembered. They began speaking cautiously, separated by oceans but aligned by a wound none of them could name. Messages arrived late, distorted by time zones and translation, but each exchange stitched together a path. Not a revelation. A narrowing. The same timestamp echoed in their records. The same minute. The same silence. Instruments in Alaska. Ledgers in France. A single name erased from a Lagos apartment. Each detail pointed in a direction the maps barely bothered to mark. The coordinates hovered just above the waterline, deep in the South Pacific, east of nothing, west of less. No shipping lanes crossed the area. No weather patterns explained the disturbance. A satellite archive captured the section monthly. Every image came back clean. Not blank. Just consistent. Clouds moved. Currents shifted. But the coordinates themselves resisted attention. They searched for seismic displacement. No tremor. No thermal variance. Radiation counters registered 0. Not low. 0. Background levels held steady. Not even the normal hiss of planetary decay. As if the place had opted out of entropy. The signal trace was faint, barely more than noise, but enough to triangulate. It was not electromagnetic. Not gravitational. Just a distortion in timing, something between observation and memory. A wobble in expectation. They agreed to approach the data slowly. Each day, one reviewed the logs. The others stayed silent. When it was her turn, she documented the entire process. Graphs, screenshots, typed reactions. Every detail stored locally. But on playback, the files showed gaps. Not deletions. Just sections where the input faded. A timeline with the center hollowed out. He ran a geographic overlay. The name of the location should have appeared. Every coordinate carries a designation. This one didn't. It wasn't blank. It was overwritten by a single glyph, unreadable, curved like half a letter. He tried to trace it. The symbol changed on re-entry. They agreed to print everything. Paper, not digital. Handwritten where possible. But the ink faded within days. Not bleached. Not smudged. Just colorless, like memory reversed through skin. One detail returned too often to ignore. Each time they neared the coordinates in thought or research, something in their daily lives was lost. A photo they'd stared at for years looked unfamiliar. A friend's number vanished from the contact list. A childhood injury no longer left a scar. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't even cause and effect. The act of looking at the center cost them edges. He described seeing a name he once wrote daily, now unreadable in his own handwriting. She found an email thread with timestamps she didn't remember sending. The boy received a message with a video of his old home. A hallway no longer existed. He hadn't noticed it missing. They stopped saying the coordinates out loud. Not for secrecy. Because each time they did, the room around them changed in imperceptible ways. A light bulb dimmed by degrees. A drawer no longer shut fully. The clock skipped backwards once, no longer aligning with the network. When asked what remained at the center, the only answer that made sense was residue. Not material. Not heat. Just a presence worn too thin to hold its shape. None of them claimed understanding. They traded confusion like currency. Sent fragments of sentences. Descriptions of absences. Every word placed carefully, as if the wrong phrasing might be erased before it was read. The closer they moved toward truth, the more it unspooled behind them. Like chasing a voice underwater. She wrote a single phrase across a page in pencil. It's not the memory that's unstable. It's the world reacting to what was remembered. By morning, the paper was clean. No eraser marks. No impression in the grain. Just white. And silence. They wrote everything down. Pinned pages to walls. Filled notebooks with names, dates, hand-drawn map. Recorded voices reading the same sentences aloud again and again, convinced that repetition might fix the memory in place. Photographs were printed in triples. Flash drives hidden in separate countries. Some carved information into wood. Others whispered it to strangers on trains, just to scatter it wider. None of it held. Digital backups corrupted without warning. Files opened once, then refused to open again. Metadata stripped itself bare. Audio logs replayed with voices stretched too slow, syllables dragged until meaning collapsed. Photographs degraded overnight, faces blurred, backgrounds turned white or worse, unfamiliar. One set of prints arrived already sealed in envelopes addressed to names no one remembered writing. The notebooks lasted longer, but the ink grew faint. Not water damage, not exposed to light. Just paler each time they were opened, as if the paper absorbed the certainty for itself and wore it out with every reading. Margins stayed sharp. Dates remained legible, but the core of each sentence lost its edge. Locations turned vague. Descriptions wavered. A person recalled as tall became medium. A building once 5 stories gained a 6. Nothing catastrophic, just enough to loosen the grip. They gathered what they could. Attempted summaries. Held meetings without introductions, relying only on recognition that came without names. They spoke in ellipses, trailing sentences, nods across static. Each understood the other not because of what was said, but by the exactness of what wasn't. In the cities, life continued. Traffic lights changed. Shops opened. Birthdays passed. But something had dulled. People forgot small tasks halfway through. Walked into rooms without reason. Reached for words that had once been common. Conversations slowed. Faces became harder to place. Not unfamiliar. Just 1 degree removed, like hearing your own voice played back slightly out of sync. There were reports of students asking about flags their schools no longer flew. A woman accused of inventing a language she insisted she grew up speaking. An elderly man found walking along a highway, pointing to a spot he said used to be a town square. No town had ever existed there. The ground was untouched. No one called it grief. There was no mourning. Nothing had died. But people carried themselves as though something had. Not a weight. Not a burden. A space. A subtraction. The feeling was clearest in silence. In waiting rooms. In paused television screens. In doorways. It lived in places where something should have continued but didn't. Where a gesture fell short of its rhythm. Where laughter came half a second late and vanished before it fully arrived. It was never declared. No news anchor announced the change. No monument was built. But cities dimmed without knowing it. Cafes stopped playing music. Letters went unsent. A theater canceled its next performance without explanation, leaving the stage set for a play no one remembered auditioning for. They stopped trying to remember. Not out of defeat. Out of necessity. Because memory had begun to erode meaning itself. Words leaned inward. Objects resisted attention. Time passed evenly, but not rightly. You could measure it, but it no longer felt the same. Each of them returned to their routines. Work resumed. Meals prepared. Light switches turned off at night. But the connection between cause and outcome thinned. Water boiled, but the sound of the kettle seemed quieter. Pens moved, but handwriting grew inconsistent. Hands shook without tiredness. People stopped asking what was wrong. They sensed the answer wouldn't help. In the end, no one disappeared. Nothing collapsed. The world didn't break. It simply adjusted. To a version of itself with something essential taken out. Not stolen. Not lost. Just gone in a way that denied the language to describe it. And across the quiet, in every forgotten corner, that missing shape remained, unseen, unmeasurable, but certain in the way a missing tooth alters the shape of a mouth long after the pain is gone. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.